When I first got the job, I called Brock Knudsen and I said, hey, Matt Rule, I'm the new head coach. I know this is kind of a shock. Where do you stand? And he was like, Coach, I'm a Husker. I don't care who the head coach is. And I kind of laughed, hoping he'd pet my ego a little bit and tell me he was dying to play for me or something. But, that just really hit me. Like, this is how we'll build this, is with big, physical, tough guys from this region. And so that, how much those guys loved Nebraska, how much it meant to them, to see that helmet and to come on these visits. It struck me. It really gave you a sense of purpose of like, this is important. And I've always had this belief that, like, I'm not one of those guys who says I need 3 of these, 4 of these. People ask me all the time, how many more do you have? The guys are going to come. They're going to change their position, and we love to change guys' positions if it's going to help them play in the NFL. So I just try to take the best players. And obviously you need a minimum of certain things. I'm not saying that, but I'm not beholden to that. I like to think creatively, and Evan Cooper on our staff makes me think creatively. And so we try to take the best players possible. And I want kids who want to come here to get an education, win at football, and have a chance to go play in the National Football League. People that want to come here and impact the community and make the University of Nebraska campus a better place because of their presence. And so though that mindset's really, really important to me, I'll be honest, I was blown away with the maturity of a lot of the young men that I've met during this process. The guys who are committed to the previous staff, you sit down with those guys and they're grown. They're great families and they love football. And, when I say I'm a developmental coach, it just means that I believe that, like, I want to help guys get better. And so to do that, you have to have players who want that, who want to wake up every day and just work and grind. And so that's all really important to me. If we have the core of our team that's like that, we'll be hard to beat.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast, the Husker Fan Sports Show.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast recruiting special. This is Honky, and I'm with Redcast Rob.
Well, I had this whole thing planned out as far as a hot take goes tonight. I was going to list out an agenda that apparently I have. I was going to do this whole parody song of the autumn wind and call it The December Wind is a Husker. But you know what? Instead, I'm going to pour myself a nice Stranahan, which is a Rocky Mountain-based single malt whiskey. And I'm going to cheers this one to Coach Rule. Because you know what? If all the times that I have ever watched recruiting day specials and all these other things, I have never seen one handled more professionally, more efficiently, and made a fan base more excited than the one I've ever seen today. So you know what, Coach Rule? Here's to you, buddy. Cheers.
Cheers. And speaking of Coach Rule, he just tweeted out here right at 8 o'clock, right as we're going live. And it was this. Yeah, it's just a alarm clock that says 24 hours on it. I'm not smart enough to disseminate exactly what that means, but
it means the work doesn't stop, Honky. The work doesn't stop.
That's what it means. We also have a very special guest here, and we're going to get to him in just a second here. But first, we're going to go through our upcoming episodes and our sponsors. Tomorrow night here, we're going to have Adam Witchell, co-owner of Nebraska's Newman Grove City Cafe, on the Fan Forum, keeping the proud tradition of a small-town cafe alive in Newman Grove. Of course, we have Alumni Hall, 2 Lincoln locations, downtown 1120 P Street and South Point Pavilions behind Barnes & Noble. Pipeline-jerky.com. Get yourself some Pipeline Jerky. Code REDCAST officially gets you 10% off, and that money goes towards players to the offensive line. So that's a great cause there for us. Smack and Smooch custom shirts and specialty items at Smack and Smooch, Facebook and Twitter. They make our shirts, our koozies, all that good stuff. And last but not least, promo code REDCAST at hailvarsity.com/subscribe. Get 10% off Hail Varsity. And to our guest from Hail Varsity.
Honky, you've never gone through the sponsors so fast ever. I know how excited you are.
I want to get to football, and we're welcome. We're so happy to have Brady Oltmans with us. He's a staff writer covering Nebraska football and recruiting for Hail Varsity, the voice of Husker Nation. His work has appeared in newspapers across the country, starting with the Lincoln Journal-Star in 2011. He's an 8-man football alum growing up on the farm in Nuckolls County, Nebraska. Welcome to the Redcast, Brady.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat football, even if it is, about 14 hours after I started work for the day. But
Yeah, this is one of those busy days, but this is a fun one too. And Rob and I were talking about it earlier today, and it's kind of what you referenced in your hot take there, Rob, is that this is just it, this has been done really well by Coach Rule. I think that's something that's kind of become a theme over the last 2-3 weeks is just handling the situation well, whether it's winning the initial press conference or finishing up a recruiting class or having good explanations when he's asked a question about why'd you keep Donovan Rail or what are your plans with the staff that you're putting together. He just always seems really ready with an answer and how to explain it. And right now, as a Husker fan, that's all I want to see.
Well, I mean, the thing too that really stood out and what you just said is that, he always seems to have an answer ready. The fact is that he doesn't have to have them ready because, like he said, he's always telling the truth. So he's not trying to skirt around any questions. He's not trying to avoid any answers, right? So, and I feel like it's sincere. Like, I seriously, every time I hear that guy talk, I'm ready to run through a wall. In fact, I just got done patching the one behind me because I ran through it earlier today after his press conference.
Yeah. Well, let's start with some tweets of the week like we normally do, Brady. And this is one that you sent out the other day. And you've probably heard this from me, but in light of the recruiting wave, when Matt Rule arrived at Baylor, all but one commit of that class left. Rule and his staff filled that recruiting class before signing day, and the one recruit, Jalen Petrie, became an All-American. So I guess that's kind of a two-part thing there. One of them is the recruiting side of it. They were able to put together a class, but the one guy that they kept around, they developed. And that's the development side of this and turns into an All-American. Talk about that tweet a little bit and how does that relate to what we're starting to see today?
Well, I think it's a big testament to Matt Rule, his staff, and how he approaches recruiting. I think we saw it in the last two weeks or so that they really went after it. And having talked with some friends also working in college football with some history of covering Matt Rule, I knew he was going to be aggressive. I mean, he's a high energy guy. He wants his recruiting staff to be high energy, and they go after recruits. I mean, they want to be aggressive in practice on the field, and they approach every aspect of the program that way. So it reminded me a lot when I was doing some research on him, and I went back to the time at Baylor. Obviously, the situation he went into is far different at Baylor than it is at Nebraska. But because of all, the scholarship limitations and the ripple effects from the Art Briles scandal that happened down there, a lot of recruits left. And Jalen Petrie was the one, that said, in light of all of this, I'm sticking with Baylor. And Rule and the coaching staff that he assembled got in a wave of, I think it was like 22 total recruits in there. And Petrie, a guy who was there, committed, signed, and they kept him in there, developed into an All-American. And a lot of the guys that they developed just followed the same sort of system. I think it's a testament to the aggression of his coaching staff and how they want to approach recruiting, but it also does, I mean, it's tangible evidence right there that if you stick with it and if you are a recruit that is willing to buy into the Rule system, there is a clear path to success in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the class that they put together there. The class today that was announced was 31 total kids, 20 from high school, 1 from JUCO, 6 transfers, 4 walk-ons. One of the kids that was that announced today, and this was one of the big stories of the day, was Malachi Coleman, and he picked Nebraska live there on a Rivals show that was tweeted out. And I thought this was a neat other tweet, and his mom sent this out, Miranda Coleman. She's been pretty vocal on Twitter at times, and she mentioned that she wanted to give a quick thank you to Deion Sanders and to Coach David Kelly for sharing your hearts and time with us at CU. Blessed to have met you and wish you nothing but great things at CU. Love, Mama Coleman. I think that was kind of a neat thing because it's you see more the human side of this recruiting. It's not just kids signing yes or no, and these are hard decisions. Even we're happy as Husker fans that he came here, but other staffs they make connections with kids, and these kids have to make decisions like yes or no. And I like the fact that she sent that out. You don't see that a lot, but I thought that was an interesting tweet.
And I think the whole family has that kind of similar humility to them. I mean, Malachi does all of his nonprofit work and everything that he does with community outreach. I think his parents are of a similar ilk and they believe in similar things. So it's not surprising, but it's also just we all need to have that humility and humanity restored at signing periods, because some people can get real nasty and forget that these are teenagers making potentially life-altering decisions. So that was a nice little boost and a good subtle reminder of what's really the full context here.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into the class here. And the way that we're going to do this is we'll kind of give an overview up front, and then we're going to break it down by offense and defense and kind of go position group by position group, player by player. But just some high-level overview things here. First off, this slide, if you're watching this live, by state, this is just for the high school recruits only. So the 20 high school recruits by state, 8 of them are from Nebraska, 4 from Texas, 2 from Florida, 2 from Pennsylvania, and then 1 from Missouri, New Jersey, Oklahoma, and South Dakota each. And what's interesting about this is I think this is a good breakdown for any class ever. It's heavy on in-state, number one. And I've kind of said in the past that, if you could get 5 or so from in-state, that would be a great number. And if you got another 5 from kind of the 500-mile radius, that would be about 10. That would be what I'd call the local area. And then probably about another 10, if 20 is that kind of that magic number. The other 10 you think would be national people. And you look at this and you have 8 from Nebraska and you have 1 from Missouri, 1 from South Dakota, from neighboring states. And you kind of have that 10, half of your class roughly comes right from either right here or it's a neighboring state. And then you're going to go into Texas, an area that this staff has a lot of connections to, 2 from Florida, 2 from Pennsylvania up in the Northeast. So it's a class that's kind of broken out geographically all over the place. Brady, what are your thoughts, I guess, when you think of that part of it, the geography of what Nebraska has to do to put together a class? How does this match that?
Well, it's interesting because I think when Matt Rule, who is no stranger to the history of college football and the implications of it, I believe he was advised when he got the job that recruiting is typically a hurdle. It's an obstacle to get recruits to Nebraska. And as his staff kind of got formed, you look at every single staff member that's been introduced or named so far, every single one of them has some sort of recruiting coordinator position or a prominent recruiting accolade attached to their name in the past. And to your point, the connections with Texas are alive and well. Matt Rule's from Pennsylvania and from the Northeast. They get guys who also, like EJ is a UConn guy and from the Northeast and prominent recruiter there. You've got Philip Simpson, who less so impact felt this time recruiting around, but is already offering guys in Florida. And then Tony White, defensive coordinator, had that history from the West Coast in his time at San Diego State and Arizona State. So they end up getting, Kai from California. They are just spread out across the country. And I think that speaks a testament to the aggression that he wants to meet recruiting with and says, I'm going to go get it and I'm going to scour the country for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is video here from today, Hail Varsity video from the presser, and he's talking about the in-state talent. And to your point, I think, there's narratives created about local kids and the talent and that we have or don't have. And I thought this was an interesting statement from Rule.
But also, as I said, going into this, the football's really good, and the football's good in a lot of places. And, we found fast, dynamic athletes, and there's maybe a narrative that, there's not speed. Well, we went and got the fastest player in probably one of the fastest players in the nation from right here, and one of the best track athletes in the nation right here. So, we saw good football. The coaches were great. The people were great. But the biggest thing that hit me was how much those guys just really want to play for the University of Nebraska, and they want to be part of a championship team here.
Brady, you played 8-man football, right? You're from Knuckles County. That means something, these in-state kids. And the fact that narrative has been around forever, that there's no talent in the state. It always drove me crazy, especially when our own coaches weren't recruiting our state as strong in previous years. And that kind of, I thought, hurt that even fed to that narrative. But there is talent here. It's great that I for one, am happy when I see other staffs come in to recruit here, because if nothing else, it means that more people realize that talent's there. I want all those guys to stay. I don't want to lose any of our kids that we want. But I love the fact that people view the state now as some place that you can go and get some good players.
Yeah, and they hit it right away. In the first couple of days, they were able to go off campus. Rule, Terrence Knighton, EJ, even Ed Foley was out, on the town in Omaha and Lincoln. And then Matt Rule obviously went out to Scotts Bluff, went over to Pierce, all over. And I think it's going to be it's a testament to who he is and his authenticity and how he speaks. You believe it absolutely, wholesale. There were guys that they lost, and he was open and admitted of that. They didn't get everybody, but the guys that they were able to keep were valuable ones, and they're glad that they have them. And he's already looking for the 2024 draft class or recruiting class, and is already excited about what he sees there. So they're not afraid to hit the high schools multiple times and talk to coaches and build relationships there. I mean, it's worked for him at Texas, it worked for him at Temple, and he's going to do it at Nebraska. And there's some talent here, and it's a big state, but it's also a one school state. So I think that's a big benefit to him. And yeah, I don't know. He's definitely making it a priority, and I think Husker fans are very excited about that.
Yeah, got to recruit local and got to get the kids here first before you go outside to get more. And I thought that the first place he went to right away to go to Lincoln High, and he was unable to flip Benny Nagoye, but it was still that even the guys that he couldn't flip, Flores and Nagoye and even Bramer up in Pierce, they were all kids that they spoke highly of him. Just maybe a little too late there. Rob, here we're looking. This slide is by position group, and again, we're going to get in specifics with the position groups in a little bit, but we took 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 5 O-line, 1 athlete, that was Malachi, 2 special teams guys, a kicker and a long snapper, 3 D linemen, 4 edges on defense, 2 linebackers, 2 corners, and 2 safeties. Rob, is there anything that sticks out to you here as you see these groups, the numbers of how it's laid out?
Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Offensive line. And the edge, especially with the 3-3-5, and we talked about this last week, and how the guys in the middle, your defensive linemen are going to be kind of your plugs, but you're going to need guys on the edge that can kind of move around and be a hybrid. And there's going to be probably a few guys in and out of that rotation, right, that are going to be making a difference for us. So the 2 areas that we probably need to get right first, based off of the Rule philosophy of you win in the trenches, which I'm pretty sure Honky is still cleaning up after hearing that. The this is exactly right. This is I can't think of anything else that I would rather see at this point in this process.
Yeah, 5 offensive linemen, and then if you include edge kind of as a D lineman, they're part DN, part outside linebacker.
Part linebacker. That's the hybrid, though. That is the thing. You have to be that.
But to your point, there's 3 D linemen, specific D linemen, 4 edges, 5 offensive linemen. That's 12 guys right now out of a group here of 28 or 27 that we're looking at. That 12 of them are right there in the trenches, and that's where Trev mentioned it on day one when he was looking at who he was going to hire, and Coach Rule mentioned it on day one when he was hired, that we've got to rebuild it in the trenches, and that's where they're going to. And a lot of these guys are going to be some development guys, especially on the O-line, that I wouldn't expect to see playing next year, but that's okay.
Well, I mean, and he did say in his speech that the O-line is going to look much different next year, because he thinks that the guys that they have right now are going to be okay next year, because he's going to have a system, so guys are going to know what's expected of them and exactly what they're going to have to be doing, right? Like, and I think you'll, of all people, Hunky, will agree, and Brady, I don't really know your thoughts on that yet, so obviously we'll get them, but he's right. I mean, there was never an identity to our offense this year, or really to this team. I mean, the defense sort of started to have one at the end, which was just like hit hard and actually make your tackles. But I mean, the offense, you never quite knew what was going on, and there was no creativity. It was probably the most vanilla offense I've seen since Carr's personal trainer took over as their offensive coach for the Raiders back in like 2017 or something like that. So Yeah.
Is there a question there, Rob? Or
No, not at all. Brady, you go ahead, give your thoughts. We're just chopping it up right now, and I'm a little whiskey and some beer into it, so a lot of my questions might sound more like rhetorical throughout the night. Don't worry about me.
Well, what we're looking at here, this slide here is it's the 20 commits that are 21 that were the high school kids plus the JUCO Kai Wallen. So 21 kids here, and then the next slide here are the 6 transfers that we had. And the reason I wanted to separate those, and maybe even I could have had Kai Wallen over here on the transfer side since he's JUCO, is to kind of separate high school versus guys that are a few years out of high school. These 6 guys, these transfers, when you think about we want to be a developmental program, well, I'm going to go back. A lot of these guys need to be developmental that we're looking at. These 20 names, these are young dudes, offensive line, a young defensive lineman. Some of these guys are ones that you're going to need to develop a year or two in before you're probably going to see them. These 6 guys, these transfers, these are some of those spots where if you need an immediate player or you need somebody that's going to give you immediate depth, not only do we need to get them here in January so that they actually can go through an off season, which I think is important, but we're looking at, Corey Collier, a safety, Elijah Judy, a D lineman, so if a D lineman's going to, give you immediate time, it's probably going to be someone that's a few years out of high school that, has some development under him already. Jeff Sims, the quarterback, Chief Borders, an edge, running back. We got the long snapper there. So, I mean, some guys that this is where you're going to get some more of that immediate depth, I think, right away.
Yeah, the way I view it, I don't know, maybe you guys think differently, and I'd love to hear it. But the way I view, especially the portal, the traditional recruiting high school and JUCO is a lot like MLB free agency. You can't live and die on a roster based off of free agency in Major League Baseball. I mean, I'm a Royals fan. I've seen it attempted and it doesn't work. But you can build a team, and develop a team through your farm system and get it put together. But if you just need a Ben Zobrist to fill a gap and give you some leadership, if you just need to fill out your rotation, you can go into the transfer portal and get somebody and kind of plug and play that way. I think that's kind of what we saw, how it shaped up. I mean, Casey Thompson's going to come back. They feel very highly about him, but they also know that they saw the drop off between Casey and the rest and thought they need to get somebody who's able to step up based upon Casey's injury history. Plus they just build some competition, get some drive to make sure that position's better, because I think we all saw, and no offense to Chubb or Logan, but there was a steep drop off between 1 and 2, and you can't do that in Power 5 football. So, and I think Jeff Sims is one that goes back to Matt Rule and some scouting things. He's had a history of watching him. And then Jeff Collins and Matt Rule go back. So he watched a lot of Georgia Tech and Sims stood out to him. And I think that's what we just kind of see. And you look at the transfers there. To me, that's what it stands out as. You get immediate impact players. Whereas, the other, 24 are more developmental projects. Not to say that they can't step into a special teams role right away or anything, but these are the guys that are a little bit more ready to make an immediate impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we also had 4 walk-ons that were in this class here that they announced today: Cole Ballard, Grant Segrin, Caden Echtenach, and then Corver Dema. And so it's not as big of a class as we've had in the past, although I'm not sure. I mean, this isn't done either. I would imagine that we're going to get more in February, and some of this is kids are probably still waiting on, maybe they're going to get an offer from another place, and so, but for right now, at least they have 4. Now, have you heard anything, Brady, up to this point, kind of numbers wise, where you think Rule would want a roster to sit at? Frost wanted that 150, 155, big roster. Do you know whereabouts that Coach Rule wants it at?
I haven't heard a definitive number yet. I think he'd like it maybe somewhere around there, just at least to be started, so he has the bodies around. But I think I know that he wants to build a strong walk-on program again, and build. I mean, as a former Penn State walk-on himself, it means a lot to him, and he likes to instill that for in-state talent who may not get a scholarship. So it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of welcome those guys in and build up a roster more than just just the conventional scholarship positions.
Mm. Yeah, that's exactly, well, special teams depth. That's where you're looking for with the walk-ons. Two of them here, just in-state recruiting ones. This is the in-state recruiting from this year, and to show the depth of it, this is just the overall depth. We got 8 kids from in-state, which is amazing. Malachi Coleman, Gunnar Gotchula, Mason Goldman, Jalen Lloyd, Brock Knutson, Maverick Noonan, Sam Sledge, Tristan Olvano. I mean, that's a kicker. We've got 4 offensive linemen from that, as Coach Rule referenced earlier today, with Jalen Lloyd, one of the fastest guys in the country at wide receiver. Malachi Coleman was an athlete that can play defense. He can play offense. He was the top recruit in the state, could have gone to Georgia, defending national champs. So had his options. And then Maverick Noonan's a edge defensive end player and a legacy. So a really good group of in-state kids. And then we listed these other 4 that we've offered that ended up not coming here. But Benjamin Bramer, who was a longtime commit from Pierce, he ended up switching over to Iowa State after the changes. Benny Nagoye had committed to Iowa State back in the summer, and that was the first guy that Coach Rule went and talked to was Lincoln High. Zane Flores, the quarterback that I think we all wanted to see get an offer much earlier than he ever did. I don't know if they have ever officially said if we offered or not, but I know it sounded like with Joseph that they at least were trying to get back into his good graces. But he ended up at Oklahoma State, and then Cade McIntyre from Fremont Bergen ended up at Oklahoma. So Brady, again, we'll take a stop and just kind of look at this slide. What are your thoughts when you see this from the in-state, the talent, the depth of the different types of positions? You can quarterbacks and wide receivers. I mean, it's all across the board.
Yeah. What impresses me is the quote unquote skill positions. Is your quarterbacks, your receivers. There's a little bit more of that than I think typically you would imagine. And even Malachi and Cade, just being straight athletes. Because when you think about the history of in-state talent here in Nebraska, you think bruiser running back or offensive and defensive line. Zane is, I think he ended up being top 25 national quarterback prospect. Benny obviously is an incredible athlete that would fit Rule system. I think that's partially why they, really lobbied hard to try to flip him. Cade is from, Fremont Bergen. I mean, crying out loud, like it's a powerhouse for football, but it's not a powerhouse for D1 athletes. And kind of the same can be said for Lincoln High, and that's what stands out to me. And then you get a guy like Jalen who was going to go run track at Florida, and then a series of events allows him, he's sick, and then he gets an offer, and then he's got to think about it. And now he's going to run track and play football at Nebraska. So it's, I don't know. And then Malachi obviously is his whole saga and ultimately signing with Nebraska in order to get these are top, coveted guys that would fit Matt Rule's system. And I think that that's partially why this one stands out especially.
Go, Rob.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that stands out to me here too is how many 4-stars are on this list between the guys committed elsewhere and committed to Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean,
there's 2, right? And they both committed to Nebraska. So it's like we're getting the top recruits in the state now coming to the school. Malachi decommitted, came right back. The other guys like Zane Flores, I never really felt like Rule had a chance. I mean, he was already Iowa State the whole time. Oklahoma State, sorry. The whole time before then. And then the other 2 guys, they seem like the Iowa State guys, they seem like they wanted to go all along. And that kind of was the feeling that you got, right away. And the fact of the matter is, hey, if they don't like it there and they get there and they feel like they see what's going on at Nebraska, maybe we'll see them in the transfer portal in a year or 2.
The way the portal works, I still think it's about building culture, and it's about building relationships with staff. And it's just, to me, it's the right thing to do. If a kid is worth offering, you offer him. And Coach Rule said that today in the presser, where he's like, we're not going to play games with guys and kind of offer and then maybe take it away. And if there's good players here, you go and you get them. And he's not the first coach here to do that. I think of Coach Frost on his first day one, when he was being announced. Right afterwards, they went down to Bryson Williams' house at Lincoln Southeast and offered him, who he'd been a longtime offer of Wisconsin, and we hadn't extended the offer. It's like, what are we doing with a guy right here in our backyard not offering? Well, that's kind of the same way with Zane Flores. And so we don't offer, a kid that's right down the street, and he ends up going to Oklahoma State. And so those are the things. I think what Coach Rule did with this class to keep this class together, these 8 guys, that's amazing. In fact, they even added to it because Jalen Lloyd wasn't an offer until he got here. And then I'm not sure if Mason Goldman had an offer from Joseph or if it was, I think they had gotten one right before. But point is to keep that crew together, those 8 guys, that's really impressive. And Malachi especially, that's he could have gone anywhere. And it says a lot to the ability, I think, of Coach Rule and the staff to make those connections fairly quickly.
Yeah, and that's what he's built on, right? No, I was just going to say, Rob, that's what he's built on, right? Is that those connections? I mean, that's how he's made a living off of it.
Yeah, and honestly, too, I mean, I know what the 24 stuff is about too. He referenced it a lot in his press conference. It's been 24 days since he was hired, and in 24 days, he pulled together this recruiting class that moved them up to like the 23rd ranked recruiting class, I think, in the country. Brady, you can correct me if I'm wrong. They were like 31 for high school, like 18 for transfers, and that gave them like an aggregate of like 23 according to 24/7, I think is what's going on there. I didn't have to Google that or anything. I know what it's referencing, but it's really fun to just play the games and guess and say like, oh, Raiola's coming tonight. And I know I tweeted that out last night, and I don't care if I was right or wrong, because for me, it's just been fun. And that's so far, I would say that one thing Rule has done for me, and I don't know how other fans feel, but I kind of feel like maybe they do feel the same way, is that since he's been the coach the last 24 days, it's been fun again. It doesn't feel like anybody's floating us a bunch of crap. It doesn't feel like anybody's been trying to feed us just what we want to hear. It feels like somebody is telling us exactly what they plan to do and how they plan to do it. And then they're going out and actually doing it. And it feels so good to be a Husker fan right now. Like, these last 24 days have been some of the happiest days of my life. And I'm telling you, it's amazing. I almost left my wife for him today.
No, just to tag on to that, Rob, it was something that I wrote about in the new edition of Hail Varsity, kind of his background. And it's one thing that I think Eric Francis, the photographer, and I at Hail, one of the photographers at Hail Varsity, and I talk about on our new podcast, was just kind of like, this is an extension. This recruiting process is an extension of who Matt Rule is personality wise. He's going to be honest, but he's going to be that kind of chip on your shoulder, not the most talented, knock you off your feet, kind of flashy kind of thing. It's going to be a workman, blue collar type, put it together, but do it by hard work and hitting it hard, hitting it fast. They're not going to, put marquees up and flashing bulbs, but they're going to lay the brick and mortar and the groundwork to try to build something. And I think that you really see that come across in this recruiting class.
I agree too. And I think that kind of it's something that I've thought about too. And Twitter doesn't allow enough characters to really get into this, but every time he tweets something out, you see these Carolina fans jumping in, talking about his failures at Carolina. Let's be honest. Carolina's had 8 winning seasons in like their 24 years of existence. So it's not like it was just a Rule problem, but one of the things too, and why I think that Rule had a hard time translating to the NFL is exactly what you just said, is that the NFL are a bunch of guys that are on contracts. Certain guys are expected to be played, whether it's by ownership or whatever, because of how much they're being paid, regardless of their performance. And so it's really hard to go in and have this kind of blue collar attitude in the NFL and be the kind of coach that Rule is in the NFL, because of the fact that NFL players are different than everything else. These are guys that have now like paid off all their debts, for the most part, are in their, basically expect to be, they're the guys that come in and get hired as like they're the CEOs, you know what I mean? And the head coach is more like an HR department at that point. And nobody really wants to listen to them unless they absolutely have to. And so it's harder to get a buy-in from that level unless you're like coming up from within the NFL ranks, is my belief, right? It's kind of where I see it. And we're going to see a lot more, I think, performance out of guys too in Nebraska than maybe in the first year or two, I think, than you've seen in his other two stops at Baylor and at Tulane or Temple. I'm sorry. Because Tulane, Temple, whatever, they're, group of five guys. But but I think that we're going to see a little bit more performance here because it's still the Big Ten, and these guys are going to come out, and it's a different type of football when you get here. And I think we're going to see, a lot better and a lot more heart coming out of a lot of these kids, especially from recruiting within the way he has been. Also, you have a podcast with Eric. I want to come on. I absolutely want to come on, man. I love that guy. He almost ran me over trying to catch that that winning touchdown at the Rutgers game. He almost ran me over with his camera. And then at the end of the game, he was trying to get pictures, and people were like throwing stuff at us from the stands and everything. And he's like, "Here, hold this." And he like hands me his giant camera, and I had to like follow him around with his camera after the game, like trying to take pictures with my phone, as I'm carrying Eric's like probably $10,000 camera around. So, yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah, we just started up. It's the eye test, available on Herd at Media and everything like that. Subscribe. We had Steve Warren on for an episode. We do a lot of photographer things. Like there's photographer talk, but it's also just like intangibles, like the eye test of what looks good, what's beyond stats and everything, and kind of dive into, a more molecular level of everything.
We had Steve Warren on last summer to talk a little bit about the Warren Academy and developing players. And this goes nicely with our next slide here, just talking about in-state recruiting into future years. But I was seeing some tweets out today from the Warren Academy about a number of players that they had that have been moving on now, getting offers, and kids that he's working with here in future classes too. So Steve's a great guy, and what a good person to talk with about when we are talking about in-state talent and recruiting and development.
Yeah, and I remember when Steve was when he was speaking with us, we kind of talked, what do you look for now? He's obviously a very accomplished football player himself. How is it different now? When you look at it through your lens now as like a tutor, mentor, coach, how is it different than how he perceived it as a player? And I think, you can talk about, your phones, your screen time, whatever it is, and, social media, whatever it may be, all of that's probably the same, but at the same base level, you're still talking about trying to get a kid in who make them believe in themselves enough to want to work hard to achieve that potential. That's what it's about. I mean, if they had Twitter back in 1995, I guarantee you that those players would be doing the exact same thing, and it would be the exact same thing it is now. But at the end of the day, a coach's job and a mentor's job, get them to see their potential, coach them up to see what they can do, show them that, and push them up to that point. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You've got to be able to instill something and drive. And I think that, to the point of how big this in-state recruiting class is, it goes to show that there's a lot of talent in Nebraska. And I think that also might incentivize some other kids of saying, hey, they can point to that and say, I want to play football, or I want to be like that. Or a kid from Archbishop Bergen and Fremont never plays D1 football, but that Cade went to Oklahoma. I can do that too. It's one of those, to use the parlance of our times, because we're sitting in an Arctic vortex right now in Nebraska, but it's one of those little snowballs that you push it downhill and it just becomes a massive thing that's just going to keep rolling, and it's just been a matter of trying to get the ball rolling, and I think we're starting to see that now.
Yeah, hey, that vortex is in Colorado right now too. So
it's cold everywhere. But
it dropped from it dropped from 36 degrees around 4:30 this afternoon to it's -4 here now, and it did that in a matter of 20 minutes. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I watched the temperature drop like on a ridiculous.
It's winter. But I mean, for future years here, we've got 6 kids in state from 2024 class, 3 from 2025, and 1 even from the 2026 class that already have offers. And that's, you think of what, for the point of 24 days that Coach Rule has had so far with the existing class, to have an entire year now to work with 2024, to have 2 years to be working with those 2025 kids and so on. And I expect to see this these numbers go up and more names getting added to this over time too. So I think that's a great thing. It's a great place to start. Again, this is where we want to start, is get your best in state, and then you move out from there. But it was, he's from the outside. Rule is not native Nebraskan, but there's such a feel that he brings, whether it is, Pennsylvania, Nebraska, maybe there's a kind of a Midwest kind of work ethic attitude towards it. He was a former walk-on, as you mentioned, Brady,
Blue collar.
and being, just Penn State and Nebraska, kind of blue blood type programs, very similar in that nature. He just feels like when he's talking to us, I actually have kind of when I think of Bob Devaney, when he came here, Devaney came here to make people feel good. And he said things his first offseason before he ever, if you ever have Mike Babcock and have a chance to talk with Babcock, the history guy, I mean, we've had him on, and I'm gonna bring him on this offseason. I'm gonna ask him about this. Devaney came in to really just at a bad time for Nebraska. We've been losing for 20 years and everything, and he made people feel good. And he was kind of evangelical and son of a preacher's son, kind of a feel to it. And it's what Rule's doing right now. I mean, he's saying the right things. They're doing the right things. Now you got to go out and win football games when it gets to fall. But I guess I've just really appreciated his approach so far. And the in-state part of it's a big part of it. Well, let's move on here. And this is where we'll go kind of position group by position group and player by player. So offense here, we're looking at each of the position groups. Quarterbacks, we'll start with Jeff Sims here. Brady, what do we know about Jeff? And what are your thoughts?
Well, he's another Southern high school standout. I think he was a 4-star standout coming out of high school. Chose Georgia Tech and worked in Jeff Collins's system. But to his credit, and to put it into context, Georgia Tech hadn't been in a great position. I don't look at Georgia Tech's program or win-loss ills as an indictment on Jeff Sims. But I do know that he had a rocky season this last year, which I think messes with his stat line. And I think if you base it on stats alone, it's a little misleading, because Casey is, statistically speaking, the far and away better quarterback. But Casey also had legitimately far better weapons around him and probably a better system to work with than Jeff did. But he's an athletic guy. He's able to move around a lot better than I think a lot of the quarterbacks on the roster from 2022 can, but also keeps his eyes upfield and scrambles smart with the ball, doesn't make dumb throws, and he's able to extend plays when needed with a little bit more decisiveness than I think you see when Casey Thompson reluctantly scrambled last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he made that reference today about how he expects a quarterback to be able to get a first down on a third or fourth down with using his legs, specifically saying legs. And we've said this so many times on the Redcast, is that the mobility of a quarterback, being a dual threat, is so crucial here. And it's something I think that has at least traditionally been a differentiator for us in the Big Ten versus a lot of our opponents that have not had mobile QBs. Now, what's interesting is Wisconsin would be one of those schools, and they look like they could be making some shifts offensively. And who knows with Iowa, they're going to no doubt probably make some switches on the offensive side too. And they brought in a transfer QB from Michigan. So, I mean, we could be seeing some different things happening there. But anyways, running backs, we have Quentin Ives and Josh Fleeks. One of them is a transfer, Fleeks from Baylor. Quentin Ives is a high school kid from Palmyra, New Jersey. What do we know about them, Brady?
Athletes, just pure and simple athletes. Fleeks is one of the guys that Rule and his staff recruited in Waco, and they just like his athleticism. He's able to go get it. He's able to get vertical and get some yards. Quentin Ives is similar. I talked with his high school coach not too long ago, and he's one of those kind of under the radar guys. But the very quick anecdote that I have for him is he was playing defense and intercepted a pass inside Palmyra's 10. And he sees a little bit of green, and the coach told me, about the time he hit midfield, you saw about 3 defenders kind of have the angle on him, and they're going to run him out of bounds for a solid return. And then Quentin just hit a whole nother level, just turned the boosters on and showed speed that no one else has ever saw. And he returned it 90 some yards for a touchdown. I mean, to have that sort of explosiveness and hit that gear. I mean, that's exactly what the Rule coaching staff is looking for. So again, I don't think he's going to be a plug and play day one kind of guy, but he's the kind of guy that you bring in, didn't have a lot of offers. So it's not like he's got, programs clamoring for his attention. He's also a standout multi-sport athlete, but get him in for, that program. He's got a good body to put on a, weight for a college football developmental program. And he could be one of those guys that is, one of the Nebraska running back stories develops into something really special from not a highly sought after recruit.
Identify the unidentified. Isn't that the Rule philosophy right there? And if not, can I make a t-shirt chain if you're listening? I need t-shirts. Identify the unidentified. Coach Rule.
Yeah, and a little magnifying glass right there.
Little magnifying glass. That would be awesome. With okay. Let's do it. Yeah, we can sell them on our podcasts. So
well, there's something that you said there. You talked about speed, and they're starting to become a theme because even Sims at quarterback brings more speed and mobility to it. As I look at these wide receivers, two of these guys, Jalen Lloyd and Bryce Turner specifically, these are track athletes that basically there's going to be some development that needs to happen with them. The likelihood of them stepping in on day one against Minnesota and, playing a bunch of receiver probably isn't quite there, but the speed is there. And now the development side needs to happen. As we look at these wide receivers, Lloyd and Turner, also Jaden Doss, who's been with the class for quite some time. And then we're taking a little bit of a liberty here and we're throwing Malachi Coleman into this wide receiver group as an athlete. He could play some defense, but so for wide receivers, Coleman, Doss, Lloyd, Turner, what is that looking like?
Well, Jalen and Bryce are just pure speed. I mean, those are guys that can catch, but their appeal is their speed. I mean, you got Jalen, who's a legitimate Olympic aspirations guy. I mean, he's talked with coaches about making sure he has time to qualify in the 2024 for Olympic qualifying for 2024. That's the kind of guy you're talking about. Jaden's going to be an interesting one because I don't think he's as fast or as blistering off the page as Jalen and Bryce, but he has a little bit more sure-handedness to him, if you will. And then Malachi can be fast. He's returned kickoffs for touchdowns. He can, turn the boosters on. He's got those long limbs to just have that strong gait and that great stride to him. He's also, pretty sure-handed. I mean, as much as you can be in November football when you can get it here in Nebraska. But I think that's also kind of a testament. Rule said that he wants to build a team that can win in Nebraska in December or win in Nebraska late in the year. And it's tough to catch a ball, then, but it doesn't hurt so hard to get tackled if nobody can catch you.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and this gives you some balance of different styles of wide receivers too. They're not all going to be 6'1", 160. If Malachi ends up playing on the offense, 6'5", and he could easily grow into a 220-pound body as a wide receiver. He could be a big size mismatch type of receiver. And if Doss falls into maybe a possession receiver, that's the nice thing about having different styles and different guys. But boy, you can't coach speed. You can't teach it, at least. You either have it or you don't. And Lloyd and Turner definitely fit that. And if they can get the development side of it down, then they could be something pretty special in a couple of years to watch.
There's another team that I root for that has that same philosophy where you can't teach speed. You can develop those guys and win some games using them. It's been like 20 something years.
Redcast Rob's a Raiders fan. So the Raiders have traditionally, they've gone out and they just, if you run a fast 40, they'll give you a first round pick. But
you're not talking about the Colorado Avalanche there.
Oh man, no. My teams are never that injured. Yeah. It's fun though that the Colorado Eagles are right down the street. They're probably like a 10-minute drive from my house, and they are the basically the AHL affiliate for the Colorado Avalanche. So ironically, I'm not an Avs fan, but I am an Eagles fan. However, make sense however you'd like. But yeah, that's my life. So sometimes I root for the Avs because there's certain players on there that play for the Eagles when everyone else is injured, I guess, or not injured. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So what's next? O-line.
Finish with the O-line here. And what I like about this whole line, there's 5 guys here: Mason Goldman, Gunnar Gottschalk, Brock Knudsen, Jason, and I'm going to butcher the last name, Machizak, and then Sam Sledge. Machizak is the guy that we
Is
just
that how
got.
you say it, Machizak? Because
Am
I
I saying
still
it
thought
right,
it was
Brady?
Malachi until like 2 weeks
I
ago.
think it's
so
Maciak.
Masiak. Okay, so
Masiak.
he's the only non-Nebraskan on this list. He's from Pierre, South Dakota, and which that one school in Pierre had the quarterback go to Ohio State, and he comes here. He was going to go up to North Dakota up until Nebraska got him a late offer. But then the other 4, Goldman, Gottschalk, Knudsen, Sledge, 4 in-state kids, big-bodied guys, 6'4" to 6'7" in between there. And I think back to a lot of the old school Nebraska offensive lines guys that it would take a couple of years of development before you started to see them on the field. A lot of in-state kids, made up those teams, those lines. What do you see when you're looking at this here, Brady? What is this? How is there one guy that stands out that you think could play quicker than the others? I mean, what do you think out of this group?
Well, if I had to pinpoint one, I think that could play right away. Out of the lot of them is probably Gunner. I watched him quite a bit this year at Southeast, and he, especially Southeast and Elkhorn South when they played, and he and Maverick were going one-on-one, and it was kind of a push and pull. Maverick would win a battle, and then Gunner would win one. Jason kind of excites me because he's, like you said, he's the only one that's not from Nebraska, but his dad is a Hall of Famer at Shattern State. And he's another legacy offensive lineman that can really get after it. Brock and Sam are 2 guys that I think just their frames. I mean, Sam's not as tall, but you just look at his shoulders and he's going to be a guy who could be potentially extremely intimidating to line up across from. And Mason's development excites me. Just the way that he has progressed over years, and to see him grow into his role. I mean, on a Gretna team with all so many weapons and high-powered offense that you typically don't associate with that kind of high school football. I mean, you do have, when Westside and Bellevue West like to throw it around, but Gretna would just sling it and do all of that, and you can't do that without a sure-handed lineman like Mason. And I think that's an encouraging sign to see, and he's bought in to this coaching staff wholesale. He was going to go to K-State probably until Nebraska offered, and then Rule and his coaching staff came in and said, we're going to not only honor this, we're going to pursue you just as hard as if you're anybody else on the table. And I think that stood out to him. So he said, I wouldn't expect all these guys to play day one. Gunner is probably the most capable of doing that, but don't expect to see these guys on the field right away for 2023 or most of 2024, but they'll be out there someday.
Mm-hmm. Specialists, anyone that watched the Class A championship game, Westside and Gretna, Tristan Alvano was insane. He made, I think, 5 field goals, including the game-winning last-second one from 48 yards. He made one that was over 50 yards. So to be able to do it in Memorial Stadium in big conditions, there were thousands of people there. The game was on TV. You're kicking into a college uprights. The ball's on the turf instead of on a tee. All those things. I think Alvano has shown everything you'd expect. He has warranted a scholarship coming out of high school, and that's saying a lot, because a lot of times kickers you can get as walk-ons, but to me that dude warranted it, and it's good to see that he got one.
No, and Ed Foley kind of talked about that, being the special teams coordinator, said that if you're going to offer a scholarship to a kicker, you got to make sure that not only can they make their kicks, but they can make them under pressure. And Tristan proved that he can hit them under pressure. And that's another kid who I think he felt slighted by the previous coaching staff by not getting offered sooner. And then Mickey Joseph and that interim staff kind of offered him right after that, because if you put on a performance like that on a big stage, you can't not offer him in that situation. But Rule and his coaching staff come in and say, hey, you're a priority here. You're not just a token in-state kid that we want to get in. We won't, we're whole, you're going to play, we're offering you because we think that you belong here. And I think he appreciated that and said, okay, yeah, I'm bought in.
Yeah, I heard Damon Benning too on the recruiting show that they had there with Gary Sharp and everything today. It was running live on YouTube for like 3 or 4 hours, I think it was, that they had that thing going. I had it playing in the background. Usually I'm listening to music, but I had that playing in the background while I was working this morning. And one of the things Benning said about that kid too is that, their practice goalposts are actually smaller and not as wide as the regulation goalposts. So this kid is like kicking from these distances and making them on these smaller goalposts. Like 98% of the time he's hitting his kicks in practice, right? Which is obviously no pressure. But by the time that he, gets into the game and actually has to make the kick, he said, it's one thing. Normally he's like kicking down like a hallway. And then by the time he gets into the game, he feels like he's kicking the ball into the ocean because he sees these goalposts and it's nothing to him, right? So, I mean, I've actually never heard of anyone practicing that way. Maybe it's something that's regular, but I've never heard anyone actually talk about it because nobody really talks about special teams and kickers with that kind of reverence. But the fact that Benning said that, and Benning even said too, he said, I knew the kid was going to make it, but he couldn't even watch that final kick. He said he turned to the crowd and he knew that the crowd would let him know whether or not he was going to make the kick in that game. And he was that nervous. And I'm going to say too, that there's got to be some credit given to Benning too. The fact that the kid decided to come here after all of that not being offered and then being immediately offered by Rule and staff after making that kick.
So he was offered by Joseph right after.
Well, yeah, he was offered by Joseph, but I mean,
yeah.
But yes, but it seems like I'm guessing that there had to be some talk there, right? I mean, Benning's one of his coaches and everything. So I would assume that he probably had something to do with that and just kind of give him the vote of confidence. Like, this would be a good decision to make and, stay home.
Well, it was a no-brainer. Anyone that watched that it's a no-brainer. But the other specialist, Marco Ortiz, I'm guessing this is good long snapper size, 6'5", 230 from Florida. If there's ever a position I feel like you could probably go walk on, a lot of times it's a long snapper. But hey, you know what? If he comes in here, we're not talking about the long snapper next year because they're all good snaps. Then it's worth the scholarship, I guess.
Yeah, talk to who's at Weber State about a quality long snapper, and it can change the game entirely. So, I do think that might be a credit to Brady Weiss. Brian Buschini was a legitimately game-altering punter for Nebraska this last year and kept them in games that maybe they shouldn't have been in, and he never had to deal with a bad snap or anything like that. And for as stutter step as Nebraska's offense was, Brady Weiss had to make a lot of snaps to Brian Buschini, and not a single one of them were really errant or caused anything like that. So I guess big shoes to fill, maybe, but
big shoes to fill. And considering what our special teams have been in the years prior, I shouldn't say anything about any. But if somebody can come in and help our special teams out, it's warranted. So, well, let's move on to defense here.
I was going to ask one more question though. I'm sorry about O-line, and I don't know what kind of time restraint you're on, Brady. So you can just tell me to shut up otherwise. But did we talk about Coach Raiola and Coach Rule's comments about him today and why he kept him on staff and everything, and the fact that we seem to be recruiting a lot of O-line guys and building from within? But did we talk about that at all? Did anyone mention that, about how his direct comments about why he kept him and how he was basically one of the only coaches that even after the coaching change, he continued to show up every single day, sit in the office, continued his recruiting, continued just doing his job and pretending he was still going to be there the whole time. And because a lot of people had that question, right? Why Raiola, of all the coaches to keep off of that staff, why him? And a lot of people, because he's trying to get his nephew or he's trying to do this. But the reasons that Coach Rule gave today about why he kept Raiola on the staff and his belief in him, that had me running through walls by itself in a lot of ways, because it tells me a lot about Coach Rule's character as well. So I don't know, Brady, maybe you heard that a little bit more, or Matt, your comments on that. I don't know.
No, I'll step on your toes because Rob, I'm glad you brought that up, because that really stood out to me as well. I think it's really easy for fans to get into, the Twitter conspiracy theories or so-called conspiracy theories of getting a Dylan Raiola or the younger brother Dayton and all this. And it's I think you guys watch too much of The Crown or the some one
Game of
those
Thrones.
Game of Thrones or backdoor politics kind of thing. Not to say that doesn't happen, but I don't think that happens as much as it might project itself just because of the monolith of college football. But it says a lot for a guy in a time of uncertainty and the coaching change to continue to go there, continue to do his job, keep his head down and work hard. And then I liked when Matt Rule kind of explained it and said, first of all, when he met with the previous, or I guess the 2022 football roster, and he talked to some of the kids, guys who were even declaring for the portal stood up and said, "Hey, I'll go to bat for Donnie Raiola. I'll go to bat for Coach Raiola because I think he's worth it." And that stood out to Matt for players to say that, because if a player believes in you as a coach, I mean, you're already 3 steps ahead of any peer that you have that might not have the room. And then when he kind of talked about philosophy and the things that Donnie Raiola strives for as an offensive line coach, there's a lot of overlap in what they believe, because Matt Rule is a former lineman. He's a former quarterback turned offensive lineman as a center, and then played linebacker at Penn State. So a winding road of him, and he's coached most of the positions, but he knows what he's looking for. And he and Donovan Raiola kind of come from the same umbrella of thought when it comes to the offensive line. And now, and again, to your point, Rob, from kind of the start, there's an identity to this offense now, and there's a coherent vision for this team and the way that it's going to move forward. I typically say it behind closed doors, but I'll say it now to you guys because we're all amongst friends. All of the changes that happened last year, I mean, it was good to have some idea, but it was a hodgepodge mix of a vision on offense, and it was a mercenary staff meant to keep a guy's job. And when that did not happen and Scott Frost got fired, then the whole, everybody puts their hands up, because what do you do? What do you do when you bring in new offensive staff to move the thing forward and it doesn't work and the head coach is gone? And then Mark Whipple, who's a guy who talked about patience and building his offensive system, he's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to, be here beyond this year, even though, he had just gotten to Nebraska. I think it's a time of, a tumultuous time for a lot of the offensive staff, and there's no really coherent thought to it. And I did think that the offensive line progressed well. There were still some ugly incidents down the stretch, but I thought they were far better against Iowa than they were, say, against Oklahoma or against Rutgers even,
Yeah, I thought there was an improvement, and I had more issue a lot of times with the X's and O's of what we were trying to do on offense than I did with this, specifically with what the O-line was doing. And Raiola's coaching what he's being asked to coach. I don't know that he wants to move Corcoran from left to right and do unbalanced stuff with him, but if that's what he's being asked to coach him, and that's what he's being asked to coach him to do. I thought something that's interesting is what you mentioned, kind of with the hodgepodge of the old staff. Rule was asked today about his staff and building it, and a lot of it is about that vision and in getting like-minded guys that come in there. And we've even had people on this show that have been critical a little bit of the staff so far. Or is it young or not? I thought Rule did a good job. I'm going to play this video. He did a good job again of explaining what his process is and what he's looking for.
The staff's all said and done. We'll probably have 7 or 8 former players of mine on the staff in different areas. And that really is really helpful to me because, I think they're stars. It's going to be a young staff. And I've had some people say to me, like, why is the staff so young? Because I'm old, and they make me feel younger, made me look younger to the guys, more relevant in terms of what's new and what's not. But also, they've seen firsthand how the way that we do things affects lives. It affected their life, hopefully, and they're now going to pour into other people's lives. There's not going to be any celebrity coaches. There's not going to be guys with different agendas. This coach isn't going to say this, and this coach is saying this. We're all going to have one purpose. There's a vision. There's a brand of football that we play, and they all believe it. And every coach, will have. Omar's going to be a star on, social media. Coach Foley's going to go to different. They're all going to be themselves. I want them to all be different. But they better wake up every day saying, you know what, my number one priority is the guys on my team. Everyone spends too much time thinking about recruiting, and they don't think enough about the guys on their own team. But those guys on our team, that's our job.
I can kind of see a little bit of similarity in the look between him and I. Okay,
I was just about to say, Brady. On a side note, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does Coach Rule look like Honky?
From 1 to 10, I'd say a solid 6.
6. 6. Well, yeah, that's true. Rule looks a little thinner. So
Nice.
Well, put a baseball cap on him, and I might, maybe the baseball cap makes a difference.
There you
I
go.
think it does too.
Well,
yeah.
let's move to defense here. And so we have 4 edge guys, 2 linebackers, 3 D line, and 4 DBs that were announced today. We'll start with the edge. And again, I am known for butchering some names here, but Prince Will Umanamilan from Manor, Texas, Chief Borders, a transfer from Florida, Maverick Noonan from Elkhorn South, and then Kay Whalen from Sacramento, California, JUCO. So again, if we're looking at guys that could be potential right away guys, Chief Borders is a Florida transfer, Whalen is a JUCO. Those are guys that you could probably imagine getting onto the field pretty soon. Prince Will here, he's a 4-star, and then Maverick, the legacy from Elkhorn South. I mean, that looks like a good group.
No, and I like Maverick's upside. I really do. I think he could build himself into somebody right away. Kay Wallen is one of those guys that he's a JUCO guy, but he only used 1 year of eligibility up there, and he's got the frame, and he's also very mobile. I mean, he's got that long, lanky frame, but he can fill space right away, and I think that's a very appealing prospect. Chief Borders might be one of the guys I think that can make an immediate impact. I think he played mostly special teams last year for Florida and played sparingly the year before when he redshirted. But I think he might be ready to kind of step up because he would fit in well with Tony White's system or what they'd want to do. But possibly the best high school guy that they got signed outside of the state of Nebraska, Prince Will Umanamilan, by the way.
Umanamilan. Okay. Umanamilan. All right.
And he's one of those just tenacious. I mean, he's just got an eye for the ball, and he takes great pursuit gaps. He fires off the line. He can drop back and
this is the
drop into coverage and play well. He can go lateral with them, or he can just kind of go lateral and then square up. And when he sees that his time is coming, he'll charge at the ball carrier and go for it. So that's what bounces out to me. Again, I'd be surprised if he plays right away, but I mean, you could maybe see him in the mix right there year 1.
Yeah, just looking size wise, he's at 6'4", 215. Compare that to Chief Borders at 6'5", 242, transfer from Florida. So he's a little undersized there, but at the same token, get in here, get developed up, and if it takes a player a year to get onto the field, I know we're in the world of transfer portal and all that, but some guys want to get developed too. And that's something that Rule talked about, was wanting to get guys that want to come in here and want to get developed and have a little bit of patience too. And so to take a kid who's 215 pounds on the edge, they might be able to find some things that he can do right away in his freshman year. But at the same token, in the Big Ten, playing against some big guys, you're going to probably need to get some weight on, and that will be part of that development. The D line I'm looking at, this looks totally different than the graphic I had this time yesterday. Now we have Elijah Judy, a transfer from Texas A&M, 6'3", 290. Vincent Carroll Jackson. Now, this one was not on the radar at all that I was looking at. So when did you first start hearing about him, Brady? Was this today, or were you preparing for this one for a while?
Well, he was one of the guys that they brought in for an official visit in the last 2 weeks, and he's one that he was on my radar, and I thought it was a possibility. But in terms of guys that they get flipped, I wouldn't have put him up there on the higher of likelihoods. But he was a Syracuse guy, and he had been committed to Syracuse for a while. But I think it was one of those things where they built up some enthusiasm in one of his recent visits, and then he just up and decides, hey, I'm bought in. And to the point, some of these kids might transfer out after a year, but I tend to think that that's not very likely with Matt Rule, because to his credit of being honest and open with these kids, he's selling them on the vision. He's not going to say, you're going to come in and play right away, you're going to be a star, we're going to make you a star, baby, and like NIL money, you're going to be swimming in it. He's not telling them that. He's going to say, like, hey, you might not play the first year, or I can't promise you playing time. I can't promise you this, but I can promise you, if you come to work and you work hard and you work for it, not only are you going to be great here, you're going to be great, down the line and eventually to the NFL where they want to get them to. I think Elijah Judy out of high school could have, has that potential. When he transferred to A&M, it's tough to find real estate in a star-studded recruiting class of A&M, but stars don't win you games. And if it would have, A&M would be at a bowl game right now.
Yeah.
Hell, they'd be in the playoff. But
yeah, exactly.
Riley's one of those guys that he's a loyalist to this, recruiting class. He was one of the guys that stuck around and toughed it out. Another Texas guy who I think he was committed and recruited before Matt Rule showed up, but I believe Matt Rule did his due diligence and said, making sure that that's what kind of guy he's getting, and liked what he saw. And then I think Vincent kind of a similar way, but another Pennsylvania guy that Matt Rule got aggressive and went after because they want to get the best team in. And Matt Rule doesn't care if you're committed. He cares if you're signed or not, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care who you talk to. So they're willing to go after it because that's the kind of program that they want to build, is by going after it. You're not gonna build a conference championship caliber team and potential national championship contender by just sitting on the sidelines and waiting for the girl to ask you to dance.
God, I look at these lists. We're gonna be so good next year. God, we're gonna.
What I like what I'm hearing here is part of it is, what is your sales pitch to a kid? And I can go back to the 2005 class that we had, the Callahan class that was number 1 or top 5 in the country, and a bunch of 4-star and 5-star guys in it. And that's great. But if you tell 28 guys that they're all going to start next year and there's only 22 positions and there's no way in heck that all these guys are going to start anyways, well, eventually guys are going to look at that and say, hey, I've been fed something that wasn't right. And what do you have a year later? You have about half of your recruiting class leave. And that's basically what happened with a class like that. We didn't win anything today, because ultimately what's going to be, the victories are going to come in the years from now, next year and 2 years and 3 years, but also how many of these guys do stick around? And to your point, you have a better chance of keeping guys around if what you're telling them up front is what they're going to experience when they're here. If it's going to take you 2 years to play, but you knew that it was probably going to take you 2 years to play, and that's how it's been, said all along, then everyone's going into it with the right mindset. And now start working for 2 years and get to that point. And if you can beat it, if you can be faster to getting on the field, all the better. But, so a guy like, Riley Van Poppel, I mean, I love the dedication that he's already shown to this class. He stuck through the coaching changes and everything. And at the same token, now you're coming in against guys that have been doing this for a couple of years in the program, or a guy like Judy that's coming from A&M, get to work and we'll see where you can go. If it takes you a couple of years, it takes a couple of years. But I like the mix of recruiting interest here, but also the knowledge that the development has to take place too. It's not we didn't win anything today. We got the team together. Now let's go and let's get them developed.
Yeah. This isn't a house that you're going to move into day one, but it's a house that after a summer of working on, you're going to feel pretty good in a rainstorm.
Mm-hmm. Linebackers, they went down south. Dylan Rogers, Texas, and then Eric Fields, new one added today from Ardmore, Oklahoma. What do we know about Dylan and Eric?
Dylan's another one that he's got a motor to him, is able to cover great ground. Another guy who's also been committed to Nebraska for a while. I like his upside. I like his mentality. Eric, I know less about on a personal level, and like the kind of person he is. I haven't got his phone, or haven't got his coach or himself on the phone to talk, but he's one of those guys that Matt Rule kind of touched on a little bit today and said that he's going to be an exceptional one and one to watch. And because he is like a Matt Rule formula type of linebacker, where he's an under the radar prospect, a guy from Ardmore. So he's halfway between, halfway between Dallas and Oklahoma City, just down there in southern Oklahoma. And he gets some eyes, but not a whole lot. And he's just aggressive. I mean, he's got the makeup speed and the charge to beat somebody off the line and to meet a running back. He takes great pursuit angles. So if they try to hit the corner, he's right there with a helmet in the chest to meet him there. That's what stands out on film to me. He's got incredible stats as a tackles, but stats can look different in different ways, but this is a kid that you see on film and think that, okay, yeah, He might not have gotten the offers, from other Big Ten schools, but that's not the kind of guy that Matt Rule develops. Like Matt Rule gets those guys that are just the tenacious, the underdiscovered, the under the radar ones with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. I mean, you see the 4-star, guys, and you high five about them, but this is the kind of Eric Fields is the kind of athlete that Matt Rule has made a living off of, and he's the kind of guy that I think Husker fans really pop for, and they love, because they're the kind of guy that's like nobody gave him the time and effort, and next thing you know, he's causing a big third down stop in a game against Michigan.
I was going to say that the best players in football on the defensive side of the ball aren't necessarily like your defensive linemen that you can see like, yeah, okay, a guy got stuffed at the line, big deal. It's like you always hear like, oh, once he got to the second level, but like those linebackers that basically stopped the guy at like 1.2 instead of getting to 2, right? Like those are the guys that everybody notices right away. The ones where, okay, maybe this running back slipped through 1 or 2 defensive linemen, but immediately there was a linebacker, 230-pound linebacker, just smashing him, for a loss or something right there at the line. Like those are the guys that are going to make the difference, especially in this, again, 3-3, 3-3, 97, 42, whatever it is, defense they're going to be running. Like that, those are the guys that are going to make the difference, right? You're going to have that one guy kind of hovering, we'll call him like it's almost like a safety linebacker hybrid, right? Where you're never quite sure exactly what they're going to be doing. And
we'll go over the defense in a future show, Rob. But even today, Coach Rule, didn't settle on say, hey, we're running a 3-3-5. He didn't settle on any one specific alignment. And he said we run multiple alignments. We've done 4-man alignments in some of our previous stops. So what you want to do is get good players, and then good players will fall into it. When
I'm just fired up, Honky. I'm just fired up.
Well, when I heard you, Brady, talking about Fields and Rogers and these guys that hit and make a stop at the line, immediately my thought was that's what Houseman was. And it's unfortunate to see him gone. There, we're from Columbus, most of the Redcast, so that's one of those guys that match that. But hopefully that's what Dylan and Eric can help bring here in time too. DBs, we have 4 of them here. Again, one of them is a transfer from Florida, Corey Collier. And then we have Dwight Boodle. He's been with us since the very beginning, DiCaprio's younger brother, from Miami Killian. Ramir Stewart, a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania guy, so someone from the Northeast. And then Sincere Safuala, and he is from Bradenton, Florida. And for any Husker fans from the 90s, Bradenton was a nice little pipeline that we had back then. You may have heard of Tommy Frazier and Tyrone Williams and those guys. So it would be great to get back down into that area, Manatee and Bradenton, and get some more guys from there too.
And these are, I don't know. It's just a fun defensive back group to look at because, and to your point, Matt Rule just kind of said he likes Tony White not only for the 3-3-5 and the things that they did, but because they can get creative with it. And if you want speed, athleticism, whatever you want at that final level and in the secondary, this is a kind of a good eclectic mix of it. I mean, Corey is another Florida transfer who didn't really have those, defensive back snaps, mostly played only on special teams, but he's got a good motor and was another highly sought after high school recruit. And I think sees Matt Rule's project and what he wants to build as appealing. Dwight's another guy that is bought in. I mean, and there's a reason why he's been sought after by like 3 different head coaches and reassured by the interim in between them is he's there. I mean, he's got the athleticism. He's every bit on film as DiCaprio was at the time. And he's just going to stand out to you. Whereas Ramir is kind of the workman like safety. He's going to kind of be that rover back a little bit, to use the 3-3-5 analogy, back when it was before Tony White's time, but still Rocky Long, when he was using it at New Mexico, there was a really good rover back that just lit up at New Mexico that got drafted in the NFL, but it was kind of undersized. And well, that guy was Brian Urlacher.
Yeah.
So he's kind of the similar guy, 6 foot, still sub 200, but you can kind of see what he's going to do. Is he going to, they're going to make him more of a bruiser and he's going to kind of fluctuate a little bit, or are they going to keep his athleticism and let him play back? And then Sincere is interesting to me because he's he is all limbs. I mean, he's got a huge span at 6'1". He's able he's got those long legs, which gives him makeup stride, and he's got long arms and able to, disrupt and everything in the passing game. I think he's one of those guys that they'd like to see maybe get a little bit more physical. He's physical at the line because he's got those long arms and can jam somebody up and has the makeup speed to get behind him. But I think they'd like for him to play a little bit more physical at the college level. But that's kind of what you're looking at with all of these guys. Each one of them have developmental aspects to them that they want to get into Rhule system and work on, but they all kind of bring their own little specialties and things that they have inherent to themselves to the table.
I'm so happy to see that you think they're going to win a national championship next year.
Well, I think that's a good breakdown of, player by player and really getting a chance to go through the class as a whole right now. This is the early signing period, so there still is a second one that will happen in February. So it's not a complete class yet. I guess kind of as we get into a closing here, were there any big misses? Is there somebody that you still think is big out there that we still might get out of it? What do you think are maybe still some needs here over the course of the next 2 months as they go towards the second signing period? I mean, what are your kind of thoughts to kind of sum it up so far?
Well, from today, I don't think that there's really anybody that they missed upon that they really wanted, or I don't think that there's anybody out there that they think, that one got away. I think there are definitely guys out there that chose to go elsewhere that I think they wanted, and that they would have been really happy to get into Nebraska. But I don't think that there's one that's kind of like, the prized possession that got away from them. Looking ahead, I think Cameron Lenart's the one that I think might appeal the most. He was committed and then decommitted with when Chenander got fired. And he's another one of those tenacious edge rushers and a guys that you can fit into that hybrid front or system, however you want to look at, because he kind of is an edge linebacker hybrid.
And he didn't commit to anywhere today?
He didn't commit anywhere. He will announce his commitment at the Under Armour All-American game on January 3rd.
Gotcha.
As will Ramir Stewart, who is a guy Nebraska's still in the mix on because they offered him a scholarship and talked with him at length. I guess that would have been earlier this month. But I'm not exactly sure how serious at this point he's considering Nebraska, but I know Nebraska is involved in his announcement process, which again, he will make as well because he is also playing in the All-American game on January 3rd.
Hmm. What about the two transfer offensive linemen? There was Ben Scott from Arizona State, and then I'm missing the guy's name, but the guy from Rhode Island. Do we know what happened with them?
Ben Scott, I haven't heard anything, but Ajani Cornelius committed to Oregon. So he'll sign with Oregon, and I don't know if Nebraska's competing with Tennessee, Ohio State, and Oregon for some of the most sought after transfer portal FCS guys that there is out there. I think there's probably worse places Nebraska would like to be in that transfer portal market. So it's a sign of the times, I guess.
Yeah, and with the offensive line, I mean, that was something that Rhule talked about today was, he liked a lot of the players that he had in it right now. And it was a week ago, I was at the Pipeline Jerky event that was at Alumni Hall and talked with a couple of the guys that were on the line last year. And immediately, Kevin Williams, who has since entered the transfer portal, he talked quite a bit about the difference in the strength and conditioning and what they're going to be doing with them, and a lot more of the kinesiology and just flexibility. And I think that's something that you may see all of these guys, whether it's Ben Hart or Prohaska, Corcoran, you name it. The guys have maybe a little bit more bend in them next year. And that's that development side. We get some of those guys coming back, and maybe we don't have to rely as much on getting a transfer to in here on the O-line, that we have some returning guys. Scott was an interesting one to me, and I don't know if he's off the table or if he still would be available at all, but the Arizona State transfer, just because he had so many games playing there. Plus, I think there were some connections with him in Nebraska. His mom was from Columbus, of all things. And so he actually, I think, even grew up a fan. So it would be interesting if someone with, 20 plus games of starting experience from Arizona State was a part of the line, but I haven't heard anything more about him.
Well, and back to Kevin too, like that it's really curious too, because talking to you, Honky, and some of the things that he said to you and whatnot, and then like 2 days later announces the transfer portal. He's a Nebraska kid who wasn't heavily recruited by previous coaches finally got recruited out of Northern Colorado as a, in the transfer portal, gets injured right around the time when it seems like he was going to start getting some playing time. Watching him, I mean, he was smashing some guys on the line. The game that he got injured in, I think he was in like the previous like 10 plays. And I was watching him. Obviously, I have an interest. I talked to him over the summer. He's a Northern Colorado kid. So, that's 6 blocks away from my house. I'm watching him play, and he's smashing these guys on the opposing line, like literally smashing them, like throwing them back 10, 15 yards on some of the run plays that we had. And then all of a sudden he was out of the game. Turns out he was injured. He goes into the transfer portal. What are the odds that he comes back out, and why did he go? Like, do you know anything about that?
Well, I know he had to get he's trying to get a walk or a red shirt waiver to get like a 7th season. So that was something he was saying that day he just applied for.
Yeah. No, and I'm not exactly sure if he wasn't reciprocate. I don't know if he wasn't receptive of Rule or the coaching staff or anything like that. I haven't heard anything like that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there was just that uncertainty. Maybe he didn't vibe well with Coach Raiola, and maybe he wants to see through his the end of his playing career somewhere else. But Matt Rule did touch on today, they're not gonna have ill will and ill feelings of anybody if they want to come back and redact themselves from the transfer portal. So I know that Kevin's getting some offers, so it's not like he's not getting offers, but also I don't think any of them are Big Ten caliber or to the aspirational level of where Nebraska is at. So that it'll be one to watch.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he came back. He's been really quiet on Twitter. He used to message me back at least and just thank me or just kind of give me a heads up, like when I would message him and just tell him great game, things like that. I haven't really heard back from him, so I'm just hoping that 1, he's recovering from his injury well. 2, I hope he gets that extra year, because it would be really interesting to see a guy like him with a new strength coach kind of helping him develop around some of the areas that he probably needs help, where he wasn't getting that kind of development at some place like UNC, where I've seen their training room and it's like not even like a 10th of the size of what Nebraska has to offer. Actually, the gym I go to is bigger than the training facility that Northern Colorado has. Some of the players actually work out there. And so I hope somebody like him comes back, because he seems like the athletic type of offensive lineman that Nebraska would be looking for in a lot of ways in those trenches. And he had the size, so I would love to see him come back.
Yeah, I bring it up as much as anything. Is just I think the changes in the strength and conditioning that they're looking to do, I think that there's potential to see some big changes on the O-line with guys that are returning. If they bring in if a Ben Scott or someone like that comes in as well that can compete, that's awesome too. But I'm really curious to see what some of those guys, Ben Hart, Proska, Corcoran, Newly coming off of the season. I'm curious to see what those guys look like with a little different training under their belts. That's something that you see sometimes when coaching changes happen, you can see some pretty significant changes in strength and conditioning. We saw that with Pelini when they came in with Dobson, and some of the things they did with guys like Sue and Dillard and that defense, guys that were the defensive backs that were stiff in the hips, as they said. They made a big difference just in that one off season between 07 and 08. And I'm really curious to see what we see with some of those guys, some of the same players here, same position groups coming back for next year. So it's a lot of fun. This is a great time of year. I mean, it's all positive. We got some recruits in here today.
Off-season national champs.
Coach Rule has I didn't even get to. I got 20 different audio clips from him today. Barely got to any of them, but he's going to win a lot of the audio clip wars. I mean, he's a great speaker out there. It's a lot of fun listening to him and everything. But Brady, it's been great to have you on too. It's we've been meaning to have you on for a while, anyways. We are kind of sister show or whatever you want to call it with the Hurrdat Network with Hail Varsity. So it's great to get Hail Varsity people on, and Brady, we've been reading your stuff and you've done wonderful there. Take us out here. Tell us, tell the listeners where they can find you, listen to you, read you, and give us your parting shots.
Well, follow me on Twitter at Brady Oltmans, BradyOltmans. Really, don't have a whole lot else going on. I'm now Eric Francis, Hail Varsity staff photographer, and I co-host a podcast, The Eye Test, on Herdat Media, where we again talk about kind of the games. Sometimes Eric will bring up a photo and we'll just dissect the photo, what we see, what we like, what stands out to you about it. We're just in the infancy, so it's going to develop into something, a linear thing with this episode. We're going to develop it as it kind of goes along and get it in. But yeah, that, and then just keep following along, hailvarsity.com, because the stories will keep coming even over the holiday season. So the work never ends.
That's right. Well, Redcasters, use Redcast at checkout of hailvarsity.com/subscribe. Get 10% off of your annual subscription, and then go to Hail Varsity Club, and with your subscription, I think you get like 10% off of food and drinks there. So it's the gift that keeps on giving all year long, Clark. Rob, do you have any parting shot on your end? Or,
I mean, this great show. Brady, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. I know we got to talk a little bit before the Rutgers game. I think that was the first time I met you. The Hail Varsity guys, and Eric, oh my God, that guy is great. And he interacts with me on Twitter, and he's hilarious. And talk about just like some of the best people out there for Husker sports, you guys, like Hail Varsity staff. If you're looking for people outside of your normal, like ESPN radio, or outside of the Journal Star or the World Herald or any of those areas, and you're just looking for people who are focused on Husker sports, know their thing, and are just overall good people in general, and will treat you with respect and kindness. Brady's one of those people, and Aaron is one of those people, and Eric is one of those people, and Chris Gorman over at Hail Varsity is one of those people, and they are just the best people. And I wouldn't just say that just because we're part of the whole Hail Varsity thing. I mean it. Just always treating people really nice. So I definitely would throw them a follow, read their stuff, use our subscription code at Hail Varsity so that you can get the discount, but read their articles, because journalism is not a dying craft. It's just underappreciated right now, and we really need to support these guys.
Yeah, well, I will say, if you pick up the December issue of Hail Varsity, I did a deep dive on Matt Rule and looked into his upbringing, kind of what the nuts and bolts that makes him who he is, and how he functions, through his dad, through his high school football coaches, guy he played with at Penn State when Matt Rule was a walk-on. You might learn something. It says a lot about who he is and how he functions.
Can't wait to get my issue in the mail.
All right. Well, Redcasters, you can get that issue from Hail Varsity. You can buy that in the stores or go to hailvarsity.com. But thank you so much, Brady. Really appreciate it. Maybe we'll be doing this again in February with the second signing. Who knows? But until next time, that's another Go Big Redcast.
Go Big Red.
A Herdat Sports Network production.